Our event will now begin.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Luca Anderini, chair of the Economics Department. This is, a lot of you know the event. It's one of our signature events. It's the Razin Economic Policy Lecture and then prize. And we have plenty of distinguished guests. Let me just mention Sir Christopher Pissarides and our provost, Bob Groves. All I want to say, there'll be many introductions, is that we have never given up doing this, not even last year. We did it late, but we did it. And this year we're actually doing it pretty much on schedule. Of course, the format is different. We used to have a really nice big room somewhere, and then we used to have a reception and go out to a nice dinner. We will do that again sometime in the future. We're very lucky to have Bob Groves, the provost of the university, who will, we're very lucky that he will welcome our speaker and other guests on behalf of Georgetown University. Bob.
Thank you, Luca, so much. This is a big day for Georgetown. Every time we remember the Razin contribution to our university is a big day, but it's special today because I get the honor of introducing Professor Sir Christopher Pissarides on behalf of the larger Georgetown community. As everyone knows, I think Professor Pissarides, an economist working at the London School of Economics. He is a professor of economics and political science, the Regius professor there. He also holds a professorship in European studies at the University of Cyprus, a lovely site. You also, I assume, know that in 2010, he, along with long-term collaborators Peter Diamond and Dale Mortensen, received the Nobel Prize in Economics. This was a prize that honored them for their work on markets with search frictions. He then later became a Knight of the British Crown, hence the term Sir, with the title of Ernin Knight, the original degree of chivalry for his services to the field. The work that was recognized by the Nobel Committee focused on trying to understand the causes of unemployment. More recently, he continues to be a very active scholar and working on the nexus, if you will, of growth, technological progress, and structural change in the world. We have a treat today. His lecture is entitled Technology and Jobs in the Post-COVID Economy. And I can't wait for him to give us his thoughts. So thank you very much, Sir Professor, for joining us, Professor Sir Christopher Pissarides.
Thank you very much, Bob. And we have several, 30-second background. The Razin Economic Policy Lecture and Prize is named after Ofer Razin, who was a PhD student who at Georgetown in economics, who passed away in 1996. And he comes from a progeny of economists. There are two. His father Asaf is in the audience, and his brother Ronnie is also in the audience, and they're all economists. Asaf is at the University of Tel Aviv, and Ronnie is at the LSE. So I'm going to before giving it over to Jim Albrecht, who will introduce academically, shall we say, Chris Pissarides, I'm going to give it over to Asaf Razin to say just a few words.
Shalom and good morning to you all. This event is like a family reunion. Students, faculty, and the author's family. For us, the family, Shula, Einat, and Ronnie, is an occasion, unique one, to keep author's memory alive. So we are especially happy that you chose a friend of us, Chris, to come to speak to us. Chris is from a neighboring island with a legendary history, and we look forward to listen to his wisdoms. So enjoy the lecture and stay safe.
Thank you very much, Asaf. No, we do have more than one faculty member whose academic interests are relatively close to those of Chris Pissarides, and I'm very grateful to Jim Albrecht for helping me sort of put this together. And I can think of no better Georgetown person to introduce Chris in the academic sense. And then we'll be done with introductions, I promise. Jim.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm very happy to be able to introduce Professor Sir Christopher Pissarides. As Bob Grove said, Chris was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2010, together with Dale Mortensen and Peter Diamond for their work on markets with search frictions. So I guess this is supposed to be an academic introduction, but I want to say two things, really. Number one, I want to remind all of you that markets with search frictions are extremely important. If you're someone of my age, you're on the hiring side of the academic job market. And you know, lots of fantastic candidates come by, and you want to make him or her an offer, and you find that candidate's waiting on an offer from MIT. And at the same time, for those of you who are younger than I am, you were on the job market this year. I'm looking at Umberto and Maria, and you know, you find this job that you think is really great, but there, you know, MIT, they're considering a number of other candidates, and they're not quite ready to make an offer. At the end of the day, the labor market, perhaps especially the one we're most familiar with, is one that has tremendous search and matching frictions in it. The other thing that I want to say is that Chris and Dale and Peter, the model they were awarded the Nobel Prize for is a very macro model. And in a way, it boils down to decisions that are being made by firms on the one hand. How many jobs shall we create? And on the other hand, by workers and firms, when shall we break up the job? When shall we destroy the job? Chris's work has transitioned now into looking at structural transformation. It seems to me that the issues are very similar. On the one hand, we want to know what types of new jobs are firms going to create, given the changes in the economy. And of course, on the other side, we need to know what types of jobs that exist now are going to be destroyed in response to structural transformation. So to my way of thinking, all of this follows a thread. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Chris. I think we should mention that there'll be a Q&A session afterwards. The way we'll do it is you should submit any questions that you have using the Q&A feature, and then after Chris finishes his talk, I'll read out the questions for him. So welcome. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Jim. Over to Chris. You can put questions in the Q&A box as soon as you see the Q&A box, even while Chris is talking. Thank you again, Chris.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all, Bob and Jim, for the introductions, Luca, for the invitations, especially Asaf. It's really an honor for me to be giving this lecture. And it's a special honor to have Asaf and Rani in the audience. Rani, of course, is my colleague, but we haven't crossed each other in the corridors of the LSE for more than a year now. I hope that it won't be long before we do. And Asaf, neighboring countries, as he said, but still a sufficient friction to enable frequent contact. It's been a long time, in fact, since. Now, as Jim just said, the talk that I'm giving today is a natural progression of my work with Dale Mortensen and the related work of Peter Diamond. In the work with Dale, we consider technology shocks, and without identifying where they came from. And we left it as an open question where they've come from and where new jobs have come from. But then we looked at the implications for the functioning of labor markets. When you have competition for jobs, like Jim's MIT example, for both firms and workers. And then we concluded that there will be some unemployment in between, and we studied the properties of that unemployment. Since then, I sort of moved on to looking at technology shocks again, but asking the question of employment shifts rather than the existence of unemployment. How is employment going to respond to these technology shocks, and what sectors of the economy will be creating the jobs, and how do they compare with the sectors that are shutting the jobs down? I do think that in the future research in this area, the two complementary areas of research that we studied should be put together. In other words, to bring more frictions into the structural transformation models that we've been working on more recently, and see what kinds of unemployment will arise and what will be the durations of those unemployment, because I think potentially those could give rise to a long-term unemployment if the economy is left alone to function without help from government. But that's a kind of future research project, and especially any PhD students listening or any thinking about PhD topics, I do think that this is an important PhD topic. Today, I'm going to address the issue of structural transformations in the presence of technology shocks, the technology that we're all talking about now, and it's not surprising because the dominant new technology in labor market is automation. So I will talk about automation, what that implies for structural transformations in the labor market. And of course, what we've had over the last year has been this enormous unexpected shock, which was COVID-19, whose impact on the economy is similar to the impact of technology shocks. And I'm going to try and bring these two together. I will share a screen. There are a lot of slides with lots of write-ups. Let's see, let's share this one and move on to a slideshow. Very good. Okay, so we're having technology and jobs in the post-COVID economy. We're not quite at the level of the post-COVID economy, so there will be a little bit of guessing, crystal ball gazing, but surveys are emerging out of the corporate economy, especially where they're telling us what the impact of COVID will be on the economy, and that's the basis on which I will make my remarks about the future. So what I'm going to tell you then is a description of the pre-COVID trends following automation, and then I will discuss the impact of COVID-19 on jobs. I have 4 topics. 2 topics are on pre-COVID trends, 2 on post-COVID. First, I will talk about what kind of automation we are talking about here. Then I will introduce you the general framework of thinking about structural transformations in automation and job destruction and job creation in this economy. Then what COVID-19 is doing to the economy, and getting rather excited by this, which is rather sad because it's a disease after all, but it does introduce interesting points for macroeconomists like myself. And finally, and I hope we do get the time to do it, what can governments and businesses do to help? Because I do believe that the corporate sector in particular, but also government, could help a lot in introducing a happier new normal after COVID than the one that we had before. Let's then begin with the three phases of automation. The first one is computerization that took place in the 1980s. Those of you who are still students and in the audience probably think that computers have been with us forever. In fact, in the 1980s, when I was doing most of my work, when I was getting those great ideas about markets with friction and all that, we didn't really have computers. We were writing our papers, solving our equations, pen and paper, and giving it to a secretariat pool, typing it up. A week later, you got it, you didn't make many revisions, you send it to a journal, and in those days, journals used to publish papers, at least my papers, more than they do now, I should say. Computers came into the office in the 1980s, think of Microsoft, kind of the whole office programs. Software could do word processing, data calculations through Excel, filing, your files being put in one place, information storage and retrieval easily by using search mechanisms. And they could do it much faster and more accurately than employees. The efficiency, of course, and the usefulness of office services has increased. And when the internet came along, they increased it even more because you could exchange information and you could collect information online much more. Now, what was the impact on workers from this first phase of automation? The workers that have been most affected by this new technology, by Microsoft, if you like, were workers in the middle of the skills distribution, in the sense that they had some education, but not university degrees, most of them at least, or beyond. But they were certainly had levels of education where you would expect to have a kind of job around the median of the job that the economy could offer. Those jobs have been affected. A lot of them have been lost, and that's been described by the people who studied the empirics of this process. David Otter is of MIT, I should say again. He's a leader in this with his co-authors, including Asimoglu and Dorn, and all that, and they call it the polarization of employment. There's also a more British definition of this, which is called the hollowing of the middle. In other words, you open a hole in the middle of the employment distribution. Now, what happened after that? Well, workers in those middle jobs that have better education and more committed, willing to go into training, have moved up, they got better jobs. The workers that didn't have a good education, as good an education, and who were in that middle, fell down to the less skilled and less well-paid jobs. You can see that in a graph that was prepared at the London School of Economics, in fact, by my colleagues Alan Manning, Gose, and Salomons, who are no longer there, but they were PhD students, I think, at the time. And you can see that the red line are the jobs, the 4 lowest paying jobs in the distribution that they examined. They divided all jobs into about 21 different occupations. The red ones are the 4 lowest paid, the light blue, the 9 middle paying jobs, and the dark blue, the 8 highest paying jobs. And you can see that in all these countries that they looked at, middle jobs, employment in middle jobs went down, whereas employment in the other 2 went up. The United States is not here, by the way, because by that time, David Otter and his co-authors have studied the United States in much more detail, and it fits this picture very, very well. Okay, so that's the first phase. Middle jobs get badly affected. The others, you could say, gain. Now the second phase what I call robotics. And that started around the 1990s when the use of robots, especially in manufacturing, takes off. And now robots do manual tasks. They carry boxes, they weld metals together, they stand on assembly lines, and they put pieces of car together. It's automation of low-skilled tasks, and therefore they replace mainly manual labor and mainly manufacturing. Now, robots, the use of robots in manufacturing has increased the productivity growth for sure, and there are empirical studies that show that. For example, by Guy Michaels and George Greitz. And these and other reasons for the faster rise in productivity growth led to a big fall in manufacturing employment in advanced countries. That's the structural transformation out of manufacturing. I thought for the benefit of time, not to show too many statistics on robots, although it is a topic that I'm currently working on. In fact, I've got loads and loads of data. I'll just show you which countries are the biggest users of robots, and those are the Republic of Korea, South Korea, Singapore, Germany, Japan, and then the Northern European, Sweden, Denmark, and so on. Israel actually, I think, are very high here. I'm surprised why it's not in here, because this data came from the International Federation of Robotics. And at the other, now the United States is not a big user of robots, but it's becoming bigger and bigger. There has been a big push recently. And the same with China, which is still a very small user of robots per capita, per employee, but is rising very, very fast. In fact, it's the fastest growth in robotics. Okay, now what's the impact of workers here? Well, robots, as I was saying a minute ago, do mainly manual tasks, and they take jobs from the lower end of the skills distribution, the red bars that I showed you before, although they do take some from the middle, but it's mainly from the lower. By far the greatest majority of these jobs is in manufacturing, maybe something like 90% of productive robots are employed in manufacturing. Now, combine that with software, the first phase, software took the middle jobs. These robots are taking the lower jobs mainly. So the ones have been left out of the high-skilled jobs, and they're the main beneficiaries from these machines because their tasks are complementary to those done by middle and lower skill workers. So at least up to the point of robotics, upper skill jobs have nothing to worry about. But now we come on to the third phase of automation, which is the introduction of artificial intelligence. AI is much more recent. We still don't know very well what the implications will be, but many people believe that there will be far-reaching. The problem with AI that scares people is not that they do the same things that human beings were doing before, but they do them much better, and therefore they take those jobs and human beings go into other things, or they take time off. It is that that AI can do things that human beings could not do before, if they're programmed correctly, and that human beings cannot understand, basically, that they may not be complementary to them. In fact, the big push in the technology of AI came when scientists realized that you shouldn't try and develop machines that replicate the human brain and human thinking, but introduce machines that solve problems on their own, in their own way. And that's when the sudden change came. That was sometime in the 1990s, late 80s, early 1990s, that scientists realized that. And that's when when machines started beating human beings in chess and Go and all that. It was when they programmed the machines to think in their own way how to approach the game, and not when they taught them how the masters of the past played that game, and therefore try and copy the masters. That was a very big change that took place in AI, and that's why I'm saying now that that the problem, quotation marks, because it may not turn out to be a problem, is that they do things that human beings don't understand very well. Now, the implications for workers here, because we don't know enough yet, there is a huge diversity in the literature, and when you hear people talk about it as to what will happen. Some people are saying, oh, you know, this new technology will bring the end of work, no more work, there will be no work for anyone to do. What are we going to do? We have to change our way of thinking, otherwise we might go crazy. John Maynard Keynes in fact expressed that idea for the first time, probably before everyone else, in 1931, although he didn't know about AI, he was just talking about machines in general. I don't believe in those doomsday scenarios. I'll explain later on. I believe that the main implication that we can be certain about is that they have the potential to take jobs from highly skilled workers, and but they're also complementary to high skills, especially those trained in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and management. I should add, economics and management. Now it's called STEAM, where there's an A introduced between E and M, where A stands for arts and more arty subjects. But I guess also why the reason that there's so much talk about AI compared with robots and software is that skilled workers for the first time are getting scared about what will happen to their jobs, so they write a lot about it. Okay, let me now move to my second topic, which is automation. And let me talk generally about the impact of the phases of automation that I talked about on jobs. Now, we have to realize that since the beginning of industrialization, technologies affect different sectors of the economy differently. That's important. You know, these new technologies that I describe now affect manufacturing, for example, much more than the service sector. Earlier technologies, green revolution, affected agriculture much more than manufacturing or services. And that's what brings about the structural transformation. Structural transformation is the movement of workers from one sector to another in response to this new technology. You introduce new technology in a sector. That new technology, you think of it as machines producing lots more output than the workers could do. You obviously retain some workers to work with the machine, but then there is a surplus of workers, and that surplus of workers leaves and goes and works somewhere else, some other sector that doesn't have as good machines. And therefore, if you think about it in the way I just described it, the challenge we are facing with new machine is not that jobs will be gone and my God, where are jobs going to come from? It's more the transition of employment. How are we going to make sure that the worker who is doing something that suddenly a machine with AI, with intelligence, or a robot comes and takes that job, how is that worker going to get the transition to a new type of employment? And I'm going to describe these new types of employment that I have in mind when I'm talking about the transition out of automated jobs. Now, why am I saying that? Well, I'm saying it because I'm looking around and seeing how many job vacancies are coming up that don't involve machinery, or machinery cannot do those jobs. And then if you look at aggregates, employment and unemployment rates have remained virtually flat for decades. You know, unemployment even now is still around 4 or 5%. Okay, there are cyclical fluctuations, and that's what the main issue that we addressed with David Mortenson was. But there are no trend rises in unemployment in response to this huge rise in productivity that we've been observing in response to new machinery. Now, how many jobs are likely to be lost on top of the normal job destruction taking place because of automation? There's no doubt that some jobs will disappear. I've already mentioned the manual jobs in manufacturing. There will be no manual workers left eventually. Now, the estimates of job destruction that you see in the literature vary a lot. And the reason they vary is that calculation of that is based on tasks. People ask, how many tasks can computers do? You know, they can process data, they can store data in Excel spreadsheets. A robot can put together 2 pieces of metal, and therefore it can assemble a car if you give it a different parts of a car. Then they calculate what percentage of those tasks can be taken over by automation. And that's a number that most people agree with. I'll tell you in a minute. It's about half. Over the next 10 years, maybe half of tasks can be taken over by machinery. But then what we're interested in is not how many tasks per se can be taken over, but how many jobs. Because as human beings, we have this unique ability that machines still don't have, that we multitask. You know, I'm talking to you now, and then when we finish, I'm going to make a coffee. But if you had a machine talking to you now, I bet you anything that machine couldn't get up and make a coffee or a cup of tea to enjoy. The machine would just switch itself off and remain in the same chair. You know, this is multitasking that only human beings can do. And therefore, if you take some task away from me, and you did take away a task away from me, which is the task of writing with beautiful pens and beautiful handwriting, then I can do something else. I can type. I haven't lost my job. You know, and that mapping from tasks to jobs is not easy to calculate. Now, before COVID, there was some kind of consensus emerging that maybe over the next 10 years, something like 10 to 20% of jobs would be lost. The OECD calculated that, the McKinsey Global Institute, and various other institutes that calculated these numbers. And the sectors most affected are manufacturing, retailing, you know, because of online shopping, food services because of home delivery of food, and generally anything that can be automated. We'll come back to that. Now, that calculation is on the basis of technical capabilities of machines. But of course, decisions are made by human beings on the basis of profit, maybe, you know, like if you're going to use a robot to take over from human labor and you are the CEO of a manufacturing company, you're going to do it only if it's cheaper to do it per unit produced than human labor. And therefore, there are cases where the capability is there. You could take over half the tasks from workers, from human labor, but you don't want to do it because wages are low. That explains, for example, why there are such huge differences between Japan and India in the use of robots. Japan is, along with Korea, the most robotized country in the world. India is one of the smallest robotized countries. It didn't even feature in the data that I showed you, in the list of countries that I showed you. But the primary reason for that is not that that manufacturers in India don't know about robots. It's just that wages are still so low that they employ workers in larger numbers. They do employ robots, of course, as well, but not to the extent that Japan does. Now, another issue here is the company responses to robots. A company looks at AI and robots in two ways. It's a straightforward substitution for labor, hire a robot to do the work and fire the worker. The best example I found for that actually is from the Chinese company that assembles iPhones and other smartphones. It's called Foxconn. And in 2011, they were employing 1 million Chinese workers assembling. And their CEO, there was some trouble with labor and all that. Their CEO said, our policy over the next 10 years is to get as many robots to assemble these phones and replace them with workers. And data, when we had data, I saw data of about 3 or 4 years ago, and they had more than 500,000 robots working, and the number of workers was way, way down, about 300,000 or something like that. Now, another way of approaching it is that a company brings in the robots and the AI, and its aim is to improve the service it offers, increase market share, penetrate new markets, invent new products, better services, in which case the AI becomes complementary to well-qualified labor. Now, what determines this choice? Obviously, if you live in a society, a kind of more human-friendly society, if you like, you would prefer the second approach to AI than the first. What determines companies going for the second approach? Well, first is the availability of qualified labor. A country that has plentiful supply of qualified labor will push the company who could push the company ahead as complementary to this new machinery will adopt the second method. Therefore, it depends on the education and skills available in the country. Second is the institutional environment of the country. How favorable is it to AI-related activities? It's digital infrastructure, the innovation environment of the country. So I put R&D there because it's short and there were too many, but people call that the innovation environment of the country. Israel is a leader, in fact, in that innovation environment, where companies are adopting AI in a friendly way. Germany, actually, of the bigger countries, is a good example here, and the Scandinavians, most of all within Europe, even more advanced than Germany. And finally, government policy towards these companies. Do they give favorable tax treatment? Do they provide the data? So policies there, where again, I'm not too familiar there, but I think again, Israel is a leader here in relation to training provided by the army in digital technologies. So a country that has these features, that has a more highly educated labor force, has a better innovation environment that encourages innovative activity, a government that has a policy that helps in these activities, is more likely to have companies that follow a more social approach, if you like, to AI, rather than the straightforward substitution that I described to you for this Chinese company that assembles the smartphones. Okay, now let's move to see what kind of job creation are we going to see. And one kind is that companies invent new tasks when some of their tasks get automated. The best example here is from banking. A lot of tasks done in banking have been taken over by machines. The best one is bank cashiers. In case you don't know what's a cashier in the States, I think you call them tellers. They used to give you cash by giving them a check. That activity is no longer available in most banks because you have ATM machines. What happened to those cashiers? Well, some lost their jobs, but most of them got jobs as relationship bankers. When you walk into a branch, they stand there at the entrance and they tell you, hello, what can I do for you? And they try to make you feel welcome and friendly. That's one type of job being created, new tasks. Another one is that jobs created in the sectors of the new technology, research positions, app development, robot repairing. That's a very popular activity, especially even LSE students. If you ask them what they want to do when they graduate, I say even because they're not into science, they're into economics. They want to develop apps and become mega rich by selling their app to Google or something, or robot repairing. I don't know if you like the movies, the student, but if you watch Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the movie, Charlie's father, Mr. Bucket, lost his job in a toothpaste company. And he was desperate because he was faced with unemployment, but then the company offered him a job again, repairing robots. And he was very happy because he was much happier working with the robots and repairing them rather than putting tops on toothpaste, which is what he was doing before. There you go. And then finally, new jobs created in other sectors of the economy, which would be the main source of job creation, in fact. Okay, what are the features of sectors that create the new jobs? Now, these are new jobs that cannot be mechanized. So they're in the service sectors, because in manufacturing, most jobs can be mechanized. There is non-mechanized human contact, and the main skill required here is social interaction. Most jobs would be created in those sectors. I'll give you a list of those sectors in a minute. Other jobs that will be created in sectors where home production gets marketized. Now, as society becomes wealthier, you don't do your own cleaning at home. You don't do your own cooking every day. You either hire a cook or you go out and eat in a restaurant, or you hire cleaners. In the area of London that I live, the most popular job for young people, especially, is to be dog walkers. They go around homes and there are people working at home. They say to them, if you work and you have a dog and you want your dog to be walked, give me, they don't charge very much, actually. I think about £5 to £6 an hour or something to walk your dog. I don't have one, but being so interested in labor and jobs, when I see dog workers in the park nearby, I ask them what they do, and that's what they tell me. And then there are new jobs created in sectors whose products are luxuries. And when I say luxury here, don't just think of designer clothes and jewelry, which of course is included here, but also think of luxury services like good healthcare is a luxury, overseas travel is a luxury. There are lots of jobs that were being created in those sectors. Now you will identify these sectors as sectors that are not very friendly in a COVID economy. And I'm going to come back, of course, when I hope we do have time actually to go to COVID. We started a bit late with the introductions. Now, the sectors that fit in with the picture I've just given you, health and care is number one, because of aging populations as well, but also and because most jobs in care cannot be automated, even if some in health like diagnosis are automated. Education, because education is still given much better given with personal contact. Body language is important, you understand the needs of the person. The hospitality industry, leisure, activities, travel, as societies become wealthier, we take more and more time off. Hours of work per worker are going down on a trend in all industrial societies. Real estate management is the marketization I was mentioning before, household services, marketization again, and personal services like personal trainers, others who do things that make you feel better, beauticians. Plastic surgeons in Korea, I was told, is a major source of job creation. Now, are there any risks from digital technologies? This is the last slide in case you think everything is good. Not everything is good with digital technologies. It could be good, on the basis of what I said before about companies, but there are things that are not good. And I mentioned three. Inequality. Digital technologies favor a few successful companies with global reach. They become mega rich. I mean, look at Amazon, Microsoft, and so on. And inequalities within those companies are huge, not only between those companies and others. Then they affect data privacy, maybe I should say. They rely on these technologies, the new digital technologies, rely on big personal data. And although there is the GDPR in the European Union, which is probably the most advanced system we have of controlling personal data, the use of personal data, it's not perfect. I mean, you get little windows when you log into something saying, can we use your personal data to do this, that? If you say no, they don't let you see what's written behind the window. So you say yes, and then make sure you delete all the cookies that they put into your machine. But of course, by that time, they extract the data from you. We need better control of personal data in these new technologies. And finally, gig jobs. These big companies that I mentioned before, the Amazons of this world, they create a lot of independent work, otherwise known as gig work, which is really not the well-regulated work. People doing it are very low paid and they don't work in good working conditions. Okay, COVID now. I assume I can talk for another 10 minutes at least, or 15. Shout if otherwise. Now, COVID-19 is a new concern. And when I say this, it's very interesting. This slide really tells you why I have that view. The way I described the job destruction from new technologies and the job creation is that the job creation was going to be mainly in social sectors of social interaction. With COVID, and then I also said that the way people work out the number of jobs that will be destroyed, they look at the characteristics, the technical characteristics of jobs, and they ask if machines can do those jobs. Now, COVID-19 is introducing another feature of jobs that was completely ignored before. And this feature is proximity to other human beings, especially in enclosed spaces, but think of proximity to other human beings. Now, what COVID has been telling us for the last year and a half is that if a job necessitates proximity to another human being, it's not a good job for health reasons. But precisely those jobs are the ones that were considered to be the good jobs to create before COVID, because those are the jobs that machines cannot do. We don't want to work with machines. We on personal matters, that is, we want to work with other human beings. So what do we find here? We find that companies are accelerating automation to reduce the reliance on human labor and on proximity to each other. And the social sectors are badly hit because they rely on human interaction, the reasons I've just given. So what COVID is doing is that the job destruction side of new technologies, which is coming from automation, is accelerating. and the job creation side is decelerating because of the social interaction. So from that point of view, and any point of view, actually, COVID-19 has been very bad for the process of structural transformation, job creation, and job destruction. It's increasing job destruction and reducing job creation through this new feature of human proximity. So what implications are we having? Well, as part of the acceleration of automation, the negative consequences of automation become more prevalent. There is a lot more inequality and a lot more independent gig work. The second one you can see in your streets. You just step out of the streets and I see Amazon delivery cars in my street. I see supermarket delivery cars, and I see young people on motorcycles delivering pizzas and what else have you. Those are the gig workers. The more inequality, you don't see it in the street, but you do read about it, how wealthy. Let me not say names, but you know the name I was about to say. Such and such is compared with someone else who makes electrical cars, for example, which is all part of automation. Now, company CEOs are saying that post-COVID, they expect automation to accelerate further. They are very worried about any future COVID type of lockdowns. And that includes e-commerce, food services, not just manufacturing. So they're moving into the service sector, especially e-commerce, retailing, and the hospitality industry. Now, the second set of implications is that companies are now devising ways of working that reduces social care. And the most important one is remote work from home. We've tried work from home. Is it going to persist? The answer is yes. I think that's the next slide, actually. They're also devising online consultations, at least in London, where I live. It's virtually impossible to see your doctor now. If you call to make an appointment, they say, no, we'll call you back. And almost all medical consultations are done by telephone. That was non-existent 18 months ago. There is much less business travel. Ask the airlines, go to the airports and see there are many more virtual meetings. We have webinars instead of seminars, new word that everyone knows about. I would be there if it wasn't for COVID now. I would be in Washington, DC, instead I'm in London 5 hours later. Are these temporary or longer lasting? Well, a lot of them, of course, are temporary, but a lot will be long lasting, and that's what we are learning from surveys of CEOs. They are creating a new normal. It's a new normal where there's more automation. It's not going to be reversed. It's going to lead to more job destruction. I said to you before, 15 to 20%. Think now of 20 to 25%. Job creation in social sectors will rise less fast. Business travel services were growing very fast. Customer relations and retailing were growing. Relationship banking was growing. Now they do the consultation by telephone, or they say going to online. My local bank that took pride in its personal relationships has a big sign now saying, do not walk into this branch unless it's absolutely necessary. People that were doing those jobs, their jobs are at risk. In fact, they've been furloughed from what I know. Now, why is there going to be a new normal? Well, because now there are new technologies. Companies were forced to invent new ways of working remotely. Zoom is a new technology. Now it's become part of the language. I'll Zoom you. Just like Google became part of the language 10 years ago, now Zoom is part of the language. And other meeting software, of course. There are techniques of employee monitoring that have been introduced that involves a lot more work, and many employees are not very happy with it, but companies can monitor if you're working remotely. Estimates that I've seen from company surveys say that about 20% of work would transfer to remote, which means to the home. That's 1 day a week. Of course, not everyone will be doing 1 day a week across the entire labor market, but on average, 1 day a week, university professors will be doing 3 days a week, maybe. Others 1, others 2. And that's to a large extent because of improved e-commerce platforms and improved business meetings in virtual rooms. Now, just the analytics behind this, that since I suspect well, I know there are many students following that you might be interested. The first important factor, and there is a theory, of course, in new technologies in economics that pre-existed, is what you might call directed technical change. But maybe without COVID-19, the new remote technologies would not have been invented. But now they've been invented, we know how to use them, and they will continue in use. So COVID directed technical change in a different way than before, and that's changed the way the future will evolve. And then they're generally related towards a nudge theory, which says that you are not doing something if you are happy with what's going on in your life, but if you are forced to do something by circumstances, then you realize that it's not a bad thing after all, and then you do it. And that's working from home is a good example of that. If before COVID, you went to your employer and say, I've decided to stay home and work 1 day a week, I can do it because I work with a laptop, I can do it from there, your employer would look at you very suspiciously. Now you've been forced to do that by circumstances, everyone has been forced to do it, and employers themselves might encourage you to work 1 day a week from home, or if you say, the employer will not look at you in a strange way. That's the sort of theory behind all this. There are many consequences. The big picture is the speculative, is the decline of the clear distinction between commercial space and residential space. Near the LSE, the way cities are, you walk out of the London School of Economics and you're guaranteed within a 5-minute walk in any direction, you're going to find a coffee place. It's likely to be a Starbucks, but there are some others too. I walk out of my home and I can walk for 20 minutes and I may not find one. Well, if work is going to transfer to residential areas, then that has to change. More taxis have to be around because you might want to go somewhere quickly. And many other services to businesses will be scattered around much more than now. Think of the transfer of 20% of work from commercial areas to residential areas, the implications for commercial real estate, they're already there. Homes that accommodate an office would be different. People want more outdoor space in their homes. Here, there's this huge demand in London for that because if you're working from home, it's nice to have a balcony, a terrace, or even better, a small garden to go out and have your break. All these things are happening already. You could bring a change in the structure of cities. 20% is a big number. It's 1 in 5 jobs going out. The consequences for jobs, inequality is rising fast. Something needs to be done. Digital entrepreneurship mega rich, as I mentioned before. Many of the jobs that companies create directly or indirectly are not good career jobs, especially gig jobs need to be regulated, like Uber drivers, delivery people, no sick leave, no pensions, no paid vacation leave, no protection from market fluctuations. In fact, there was a ruling in London not so long ago, about a month ago, about Uber drivers, that they should be treated like employees, not like gig workers, and Uber has to provide all these things that are in the final bullet point. Of course, Uber objected to that, they appealed, but I think they've lost their appeal. I don't think it's still outstanding, but it's very likely that they will lose it given the decisions that were made. That's part of governments to protect these jobs, but something needs to be done. Now, how governments are reacting? Could I ask actually how long you would like me to go on for? We interrupted.
We're not gonna cut you off, and we started late. I'd say you have another 15 minutes if you're up to 15.
Oh, that's great. That's all I need to finish with the what governments and business can do, and that's fine. Okay. Now, governments, of course, are in charge of education. Robotics and artificial intelligence require new types of skills. There is research, production, and maintenance jobs. They are very technical jobs, and universities need to adapt their curricula to them. A lot is being done, but we need to move more in that direction. I should have mentioned economics and management here because managing the organization of management companies is changing, and we need new skills in that area as well. And I do believe, I'm a strong believer that preparation for these things needs to start from schools, especially STEM subjects. In Britain, we're familiar with the system, there's specialization too soon. From age 16, you could give up all training in maths and sciences and anything. You could just focus on literature and other subjects that don't require any technical skills. And I think that's a big mistake. This kind of education, in fact, needs to start even from earlier, from elementary school. Just treat maths like a game, because you could have many numerical games. They're fascinating. Now, formal education, of course, is not enough, although it's the foundation. First results have come out from the collaboration between companies and universities, or companies and government. Big companies do their own training to adapt their workers to their company's needs. And of course, the example that everyone uses in Silicon Valley, how strong collaboration between companies, new up-and-coming companies, big companies, and universities with very highly specialized STEM training. It's been replicated elsewhere, not as successfully, I guess, given the big companies that came out of that system. But that's the idea behind it. Now, companies that adopt the AI and robotics, if they're going to provide those good social services and help their community, as I mentioned before, if they're going to do it, they need the appropriately trained workers to work with the new capital. And formal education is the foundation, as I mentioned. Training to adapt those skills to the needs of the company, in other words, improve the match between company and worker, needs to be provided by the company itself. You might say, shouldn't it be subsidized by government? I think the answer is yes. Government should find ways, maybe subsidized through tax breaks, especially for the smaller companies, which I think is coming up here. Yeah, for large companies, like Google and all that, maybe you don't have to do, although again, giving them tax breaks will help. But for SMEs, it's very important that you do it, because an SME is not going to train someone specifically in what they want. There is a risk that they would lose that worker unless the government helps them. The result, so what's the best place for an SME or a new startup to do? Well, the best way for it to progress quickly is to move closer to one of the bigger companies. Go to Silicon Valley or something similar. They're known as agglomeration externalities. There are so many workers that are skilled in exactly what you want to have in your workers as a small company, that you might as well go there and take someone who's been trained by the big guys rather than train yourself. Unless government is prepared to help you. And in smaller countries, it's the only way that it can work is through support from the government for company-based training, which is the one that yields the best results. Now, for companies to succeed, for government to succeed in training, it has to persuade, and companies actually, that holds for companies, they have to persuade the workers that they should own the training, in the sense that the worker is doing it because they believe that it's good for them, for the worker. They're not doing it because the company requires it or because the government insists that that's what you should learn. And there are good examples of cases where workers own the training and they're successful. Singapore has a very good system. I think it's called Future Skills. It gives training accounts to workers. It's not very much money, but the worker at the relevant Ministry of Education and Science maybe opens accounts for workers, and the workers own those accounts, that money. And they go into a company that has approved training, they get the training, and the company takes money from their accounts. It's been successful. In Europe, there's a fairly successful program. It's called the European Youth Guarantee, where every young person up to the age of 24, I think it is, that is guaranteed work or training after 4 months of unemployment. And it's working effectively, especially, it was started by the Scandinavians, so many other good things in labor markets, the Danes and the Swedish and the Norwegians mainly. Now, the social skills, COVID is not very friendly to social skills, as we said, for obvious reasons. But they will come back. I mean, there will be, we're all going to be vaccinated one day, and though we might be scared of new variants of the virus, they will be required. And hospitality industry will grow. I think when we're able to travel, business travel will suffer in the long term. I don't think leisure time travel, vacation travel will be affected. People want to get away. They need change. Especially if I look outside. I mean, it's April, for heaven's sakes. Go down to the Mediterranean and enjoy the spring, not this London weather, which we see the sun briefly and they say wow. So that's going to come back. And therefore, in that, you need those skills, those social skills. Populations are aging everywhere. We expect as wealthier societies to have better care for children, for old people. Those skills need to be provided. And schools are terrible at that. They don't provide it at all. I think education curricula should be reformed to provide those skills. Now, what about COVID? Well, currently governments are devoting all efforts to mitigate the recession, get income back to what it was before. I mean, you can see why they're doing it, but I think very, very soon there is going to be need to, there will be far more important problems to face. We need to redirect, governments need to redirect efforts of controlling these mega monopolies that are emerging, the inequalities at work. There is risk, there are risks of social conflict. In these days, you have a lot more racial conflict, minorities that are suffering much more in this recession than elsewhere. I mean, we have a problem here, but not to the extent that you have it in the States. Gig workers need to be better looked after, better regulation of those jobs. That's a very, very tall order. It's far more difficult to do that than dealing with the recession that COVID has brought. Now, I'm finishing. This is the last but one slide, if time allowed, and you can ask questions if you like. Companies need to pay more attention to stakeholder interests, like helping the local community, public health issues, move further away from what's become famous at one time, I guess I should say infamous now, is the Friedman doctrine of where he wrote his own works, actually here, that the maximum social good comes from the maximization of value for shareholders by a company. I don't think many companies believe that anymore anyway, but we need to move further away from that and look at community needs, diversity within your workforce, the needs of minorities, positive discrimination, how to help with all these things. Environmental and social sustainability concerns, of course, are paramount. Destroying the planet is not a good idea, even if it maximizes the short-term value for shareholders, and so on. And these are big concerns, but it's another topic for a lecture. So that's the end. Automation raises productivity, but we need to be careful about changing the structure of jobs and the challenge in the transition of workers to the new jobs. I do believe there will be, or at least there's potential of many jobs being created. COVID made that more difficult because of the social skills required to this, but with government help and proper company objectives, we can use these new digital technologies for good. And it's becoming like a term now, tech for good, for the environment, for human well-being, for community well-being. I thank you very much. I will stop the share and take the questions.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I think Jim has the difficult task of chairing the Q&A session with the written questions. Jim, you let me know if you want any help. Otherwise, I'm just going to mute.
Now, the only difficulty in reading the questions is I have a question from John Rust, and it comes in a couple of pieces throughout the Q&A box. So I'll do my best. So John's question is the following: a recent working paper, Robots and Employment Evidence from Japan, 1978 to 2017, finds that robots are more complements to employment rather than substitutes, contrary to studies in other countries, such as the US, for example, by Acemoglu and Restrepo. Both high-skill and low-skill employment increased along with adoption of robots in their study. Labor is relatively scarce in Japan. Do you find these findings credible? And their conjecture as to why they get a different result for Japan compared to the US?
I'd say it's a nice question. It's exactly what I've been working on for the last couple of years, but the paper is about to be completed actually as to why we see these differences. I think it goes back to the slide that I showed you that there are different company responses depending on their environment in human labor, what kind of labor is around, the needs, what kind and how many workers are well qualified who are complementary, the innovation environment of the country, and the government help that is being given. And we know that those things are favorable in Japan. Japan has one of the best innovation environments that helps companies direct research and innovate technologies that can use robots in a complementary way with human labor. Other countries that have that I mentioned are the Scandinavian, Sweden, and Denmark are data that I looked at carefully, and we see the same features in Japan, Finland as well, actually. Now, the United States has good innovation environment as well, and highly qualified labor. I believe actually that the Acemoglu-Restrepo results, in a way, the way you ask the question is rather misleading, because, I mean, not in the way the paper is written. I hate to criticize my former students at LSE, but of course, because the study is so good, their studies are so good, but they address the geographical distribution of jobs, the geography of jobs, rather than what happens within the company. I know since then there's been other work they've been involved, but the study that you refer to, it says they look at very narrow geographical areas, and they're saying if that narrow geographical area companies introduce robots, does employment go up or down within that area? And the answer is that it goes down. It doesn't address the question of the industrial employment. Given that manufacturing employment is in a downward trend because of general technological productivity improvements in manufacturing, if we superimpose robots in there, are companies that are introducing robots also losing employment in that extent? And I think you might find that the answer for that, even for the United States, is no. The companies that are introducing the robots become more competitive in export markets. They are the ones that can use complementary technologies with robots and expand their employment. But they might be moving to different parts of the country, for example, and you might miss them in that geographical work. So to go back to that, Japan doesn't surprise me at all. The United States, it did surprise me that I read the Acemoglu-Restrepo empirical work very carefully, but I think the results have a lot to do with the geographical distribution. By the way, I should mention this, a final thing is that there are studies in Europe as well where they show that if you look at geographies only, you get a negative impact of robots on employment. But if you look at industrial employment, you don't get this negative impact. You either get zero or ambiguous results, or even positive results.
Okay, thanks. A second question comes from Anwita Mahajan. She's a graduate student of ours. And the question is, how will we see employment affected on the intensive margin hours worked for high skill versus low skill workers? For example, one channel can be that high skill workers work fewer hours, relegating physical meetings to Zoom, but low skill workers cannot do that.
Now with intensive margin, the United States is an outlier, as it was pointed out to me by American colleagues. Let me talk in Europe, which is what I would expect to be the norm, given what we know from economic theory, which is the backward bending supply curve, if I use some old-fashioned language. What happens is that productivity rises, wages rise because of that of the company there, and we take more time off, more leisure time, which is a normal good. And that's what we've been observing in Europe for the last 60 years. The main change that you see on the intensive margin is that you have to look at annual data, and the main impact of that is on annual vacation leave. In the 1960s, we used to take 1 week, 2 weeks off. Now, any respectable company will give 6 weeks off during the year, so that the Germans and the Swedes could travel to nice places like Cyprus and lie on the beach for 2 or 3 weeks, and make Cyprus rich too. That's basically what's been happening in Europe. Some go to other places too, like Italy and Spain. But in the States, though, in contrast, highly skilled workers, if anything, work longer hours in response to the higher pay.
Mm.
You can see it in high executives that get mega money. They're in the office at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they get home after the kids have gone to bed, so they don't disturb them. Like, whereas low skill workers are taking more time off, unfortunately, not very productively. In the States, as Angus Deaton and other people have written, a lot of them are withdrawing from the labor force. It's a big, the way I see it without, I mean, I haven't done my own research in the American economy because there are so many good labor economists, including one I'm looking at here, that doing research in this area. But the way I see it is it's a big problem. And I have talked to Angus Deaton a lot actually about these problems, withdrawals from the labor force and all that. And I can see that it's a massive problem, and it goes in the opposite direction from what your graduate student thought it might be, though, of highly skilled workers working less and the lower skilled working more. In fact, that's not the case.
Okay.
I can interpret European trends because that's what comes out of economic theory, but the Americans.
We have a question from Aaron Yashiv, so we have a very international audience here. Hi, Chris. Thanks for this very interesting talk. How do you understand the following Bloomberg piece from March 31st, sorry. Quote, Deliveroo Holdings PLC collapsed in its London public debut as investors abandoned the food delivery startup. The stock plunged as much as 31% in its first minutes of trading to trigger circuit breakers, the worst performance in decades for a big UK listing. The stock closed down 26% at 287.45 pence. The first day performance looks like a disaster. As appetite sours for stocks that flourished during the lockdown, institutional investors have rebuffed the bellwether for the gig economy in droves.
Now, Eran, are you asking me to predict stock market prices? I hope your next question is not to tell you why the dollar is going down or why it went down yesterday. Well, you know that the stock price on launch will depend on the expectation of what it's going to do, and you know the expectation of those who are doing the launch of how the market is going to react and the way the market is going to react, and if the expectations are disappointed, it will drop. One thing I can tell you for sure is that whatever happened on the first day, I do think so. So I'm now predicting stock market prices, despite the fact that I said you shouldn't be asking me to do that. The Deliveroo will do well. I mean, it's a very successful company, and Deliveroo is to the extent that they knock out of the market virtually all other competition of delivery of food in services. I do have actually an explanation that refers to the real economy as to why it wasn't doing well at first. I think that has changed, and it is that Deliveroo specialized in deliveries of restaurant food, not like Ocado. I suspect Ocado must be a London. Ocado is the biggest online supermarket that delivers food for cooking at home. And during COVID, restaurants were closed and people were too scared to order restaurant food anyway, even if they were open for delivery. So despite the increase in e-commerce and deliveries in the first phase of COVID, if you like, may have lasted several months, and it included the time that Deliveroo floated, was one where their business was in decline, delivering ready-made restaurant food for consumption. Whereas online supermarkets like Ocado increased, their share price increased enormously. And the irony of it is that their CEO got bonuses for improving the share so much, as if it was something that he did. I guess they succeeded in managing the deliveries, but it's obvious why share price went up, because they were delivering food ready to be cooked at home, and they put it on your doorstep, and you went out with the spraying it with the sterilizer before you let it into your home. That's what we did, at least with the neighbors here.
So just a few more questions. We'll try to finish up before 12:30. So here's a question coming either from Chile or Bolivia. I'm not sure which today. This is from Mauricio Tejada. Thinking about less developed countries where informality is high, what do you think the impact of automation will be? On the one hand, informality has less productive jobs, and maybe automation will lower labor costs and give firms an incentive to be formal. On the other hand, the proliferation of deregulated jobs will increase informality on the worker side.
Yeah, well, that's a very, very good question, because it's a very big worry. In fact, what automation is doing to less developed countries, not only because of their informality, but informality contributes for the reason that just put in your question. And that's the reason that I signed 2 or 3 letters that other Nobel colleagues have drafted to send to President Biden and other world leaders about how to help developing countries. There are 2 factors involved here that are rather worrying about developing countries. The first one is that the old development model, where companies in high-wage countries like United States and Western Europe make foreign direct investments in low-wage countries and help low-wage countries develop in that way, China being the best example. China's growth came when it opened up and allowed foreign companies to go and invest in there, and all of them went in there immediately from beginning 1980s on. That model is no longer available, all these supply chains and all that, because at least not available to the extent that it was available to China, because of automation technologies at home. If you're manufacturing, if your car is going to be produced by robots almost entirely, and in fact the automotive industry is the one that employs most robots, even within manufacturing, then why should you go to an African country and establish a new factory there and do it? So that's the biggest worry of all. The second one is that these automation technologies are being introduced in Western advanced economies, and therefore they are adapted to the environment of those economies in terms of what infrastructure they need and what workers they need to work with. And African countries don't have it because of the informality is a major factor. There are also, of course, others on infrastructure, and that's a big worry. I mean, I have a really telling story from one of the World Economic Forum meetings in Davos that I've been to, and I was initiating discussion on education needs in the new economy around the table, where there was an African Minister of Education present as well. And I was saying the things that I said to you today, about need to STEM, encourage more children to enjoy maths, do this, do that, more of them going to school. And he said, actually, this is all very well taken, but in my country, I'll tell you what will make, what will increase school attendance and increase the interest of boys and girls to go to school is providing a pair of shoes for them so that they can walk to the nearest village that has the school instead of working through muddy fields barefoot, which puts so many of them off. And that's it. You need infrastructure. You need some basic sort of things that we don't even think about over here, which you brought up in your questions about this informality of everything, education as well as work.
Just a few more short questions. I have two questions from Rodamiro Rodrigo, one of our graduate students. I'll just combine them. How can governments minimize the effects of automation on inequality through market concentration? And automation is pushing towards servicification and COVID-19 away from, at least in-person services. Is there a good way to get out of it?
The latter, of course, is the one I talked about a lot in the last part of my talk. It is doing that. COVID is working against servification, maybe, whereas technology is working for it. The way to get out of it is to develop more along the remote work domain, public health, pay a lot more attention to public health, better health services. We now know, like research on vaccinations is helping a lot. Don't give it up. Practically the whole medical profession, medical research profession, I was talking to a doctor, a research doctor, redirected its efforts to vaccination. Now we know more about that. You do it this way there. Now that in a way, that's the easier part of the answer. It's still difficult, but the easier answer to your two questions. The first one is the one that you cannot avoid getting into arguments about how do you reduce inequalities, especially when talking to American colleagues. I'll give you the answer that that my friend and colleague Peter Diamond once gave to a very similar question that was asked by someone that didn't believe that you should be doing anything. Another an Israeli economist, actually, but a very Nobel laureate, a very famous one. And Peter's answer, which I really liked, is that don't think about reducing inequality. Don't think about transfers to reduce inequality. Think about providing good public services, especially to families with low income, and support poverty. Get them out of poverty in the way your country defines you through policy. Now, to reduce the poverty in your country, and you might do it the way that Sweden does it, for example, by providing almost free good quality public services like education and health and childcare and so on. You need money. Government needs money. Raise that money by taxing high incomes. And therefore, you tax high incomes and you provide services that get lower income families out of poverty. In the United States, you have poverty that is recognized by the government, which is about 15% poverty. Is that a good number? Yeah, well, that number, let government provide the services that many European countries in fact do, even Germany, but much more the smaller north, Netherlands, Denmark, Austria, and so on. It costs money. Raise your taxes. Make them British-like taxes, 45% instead of 38 or whatever percent you have. You're going to tax high incomes. You're going to reduce inequality that way because you're taxing more and you're providing the services to the lower incomes. Improve health services for poor people. The abolition or whatever of Obamacare, which was a first step by the previous administration, it was appalling looking at it from outside the United States. Tax more high incomes and give good quality health service. That will reduce inequality. That's how I would do it.
Okay.
Peter Diamond sounds anyway, but I like it.
So I have a few more questions, but I think we're running short on time. So I apologize to Moshe and Jacob and Margit, but I think we need to move on to the award part of the ceremony. And I'd like to thank you very much for a very interesting talk, and thanks very much for coming.
Thank you very much. It was most enjoyable. Thank you. And very good questions too.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Chris. And you know, at this point, we would be clapping our hands. It's hard to mimic a full room doing that. So we're not going to have the award part of the ceremony. Let me say a couple of things before I mention the students and their advisors. This is the best graduate student paper in the year. And for the very first time out of 25 editions, I believe, we are having two co-winners. And it's not because we wanted to create prize inflation. It is because it was genuinely the case that three colleagues who vetted these papers, I want to say, who span economics, sort of macro, micro, and metrics oriented, all said, "Oh, we got two winners." Okay, so this is not the beginning of price inflation. It's a unique situation where we want to recognize two separate co-winners. We used to give them a fancy printed thing, and I think Julius will be able to flash those on the screen. Maybe we'll do that in sequence. We'll do, so the first winner is Maria Hernandez de Benito, and her paper is entitled "The Effect of Violent Crime on Intra-Household Resource Allocation and Bargaining Power." Her advisor is Garance Génicot. They will all be given the chance of saying a few words. And the second winner, if we can get that, Julius, is Umberto Muratori. And his paper is entitled "Knowledge Diffusion, Markups, and Cohorts of Firms." And his advisor is Toshi Mukoyama. And now, often the winners would have even their parents in the room. I'm not sure if there are any relatives of parents in attendance. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to let's have Maria and then Garance and then Umberto and then Toshi saying a few words for this. By the way, there's also we used to present a check. The money is in their accounts. It's I clicked. They do win a relatively small amount of money. Maria, your turn.
Hello, thank you very much for the award, and thank you everybody for being here, especially since it's not as fun as meeting in person and getting all that fancy free food we used to get. Thank you to the Razin family for organizing this event every year. It actually means a lot to the grad school and to the grad students in particular. In my dissertation, I studied what happens when there are changes in the environments where households live, and in particular, what happens when there is an increase in the exposure to crime. And what I find is that beyond the importance of looking at direct effects in, for example, victimization or labor market shocks, it is also important that we look at what happens inside households, because there can be important welfare consequences, for example, in the form of changes in expenditure allocations or deteriorations in female bargaining power. There would be a very long list of people that I would need to thank that have helped me along the way. Of course, first and foremost, Garance Génicot, who's my main advisor, and I believe the best advisor anyone could ever have, and a role model basically in every aspect of life. Thank you to every professor at Georgetown that has sat with me at any point to give me feedback, with a special note to Martin Ravalion and Andrew Seidling. Of course, thank you so much to all my classmates at Georgetown and friends. And I don't think actually it is a coincidence that this year we are two winners, because if there is something that was very important in my cohort, and a big example since the beginning, was that collaborating is always the best way to go in life, and as opposed to toxic and unhealthy competition between each other. And Umberto and I have literally worked on every step of the PhD, from every problem set in the first year to infinite conversations during the job market. So I'm very grateful that I had such luck in my cohort. And finally, of course, thanks you to my family along the way. And my mother is actually watching from space. So un beso a mi madre que está en casa. And thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you, Maria. And over to Maria's advisor, Garance.
I just want to congratulate Maya for her job market paper that I think it's excellent. It is technically very well done and careful analysis, but it's also showing something that has been highlighted outside of the economics profession, but not in the economics profession, but that conflict might reduce the bargaining power of women. And so I think it's a great contribution, and I have high hopes for the paper. Congratulations for surviving the job market and finding a great job. All of you guys are survivors. And so good continuation. I have high hopes for the future.
Thank you, Garance. We all do. And now Umberto, and then Toshi.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm honored to receive the Razin Prize. As Maria mentioned, I'm very happy to receive the prize, to win the prize with her, since all our PhDs start basically at the same time, and we did all the steps together. My paper explored the relationship between markups, knowledge creation, and knowledge diffusion. And in particularly, I focus on how the evolution of markups, knowledge creation, and knowledge diffusion exchange has evolved by cohort of firm, and what are the implications for the aggregate markups and for the diffusion of knowledge in the economy. I'm seriously deeply in debt with Toshi for all his feedback, for all his support, for all his advices, encouragement that I got over the past years, and I couldn't not be here without like his help. For that, I'm really thankful. I'm also grateful to my other two committee members, Adriana Kugler and Dan Cao, and all the faculty that have spent time with me, and all what I learned from them. So I'm very grateful for all the support that I received in this year. Finally, I would like to thank my family, my friends, and particularly my girlfriend, for all like the moral support and the standing of the comfort in the really dark moment. There's been like some dark moment, and for all the help that I received, I think all of us in the PhD received in this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Umberto. I see, I can search. There are two Muratoris in the audience. So your family, some members of your family are watching us. Congratulations again, and over to Toshi.
Thank you. First, congratulations to Umberto and Maria and their families for this prize, and also I'd like to thank Razin family for this prize. This prize embodies the niceness and friendship and hardworking nature of our PhD program, and I hope this tradition continues. And Umberto's thesis has explored the very topical topics. One is a markup, which is market concentration, big concern in this, especially in this COVID economy, and then also knowledge diffusion, which relates to very important heart of economic growth process. So I believe that this is an important paper, and I'm very grateful for Chris for coming and delivering this wonderful lecture, and this virtual lecture. They are good and bad, and bad is of course that we cannot see each other in person, but good is that we have all these families and many audiences who can listen to and participate in this wonderful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Toshi. Indeed, I was going to say that before I thank again everybody. The online is good. It really is good and bad. I was watching this, and at the peak here, we had 150 people logged in between panelists and the audience, separated by oceans, continents, and everything else. And something that is in a sense easier to achieve than otherwise. I predict that we will be forever doing these things in at least mixed modality, so that people can log in from far away. Let me thank again Chris Pissarides for a wonderful stimulating lecture, and the Razins. I see. I've forgotten Asaf's wife name. I'm sorry. So both Ofer's parents are there, and Ronnie Ofer's brother. And thank you for coming. And thank you to Bob Groves again for introducing us. I'm not sure if Bob wants to say anything, any more as a parting remark. And thank you also to the people who helped us put this together, Julius Shapiro and Christopher, but I forget his name, from University Information Services. This is actually behind the scenes is a little trickier than you guess when you're just watching. So thanks everyone for their help. And unless Bob wants to say something again, I will thank everyone, and I take it that anybody who has been highlighted, actually not I take it, if anybody who has been on video objects to the recording being put online eventually, please let me know. Otherwise, we will assume that there is no problem. We will edit somewhat the video and then make it available through our website, as we have done in the past. And thanks again, everyone, and especially, of course, Chris. I want to say that, yeah,
thank you very much, Luca. It was a real honor giving the lecture, and thank you, everybody. And hello, Asaf. I hope we meet again soon. And
I just realized I left Jim Albrecht off my thank you list, and of course that was
I did too. Thank you, Jim. Jim organized everything in the early days, at least.
Okay.
We'll meet you in Cyprus or in London or in the US.
In Cyprus, if you want to come, it's a shorter trip. There is an innovation center, which is collaboration between Cyprus and Israel, is opening in a few weeks' time. And unfortunately, I cannot go because of COVID. Otherwise, I could have invited you.
I'm coming too, Chris. I'll write to you separately. I'm joking.
Okay.
Chris,
Sure,
I'll see
not?
you in the office. The offices are open now, so.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you again, everybody. I think UIS, we can close this. And again,
Thank you
thank you,
so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.